Good evening. Haringey Council have been forced to step in after Finsbury Park was turned to mud after a Tough Mudder endurance challenge over the weekend involving hundreds of competitors. This morning, locals said they were left with no choice but to make a formal complaint to the council because of the damage left behind. Well, tonight, Haringey Council announced the challenge will never happen again in the park and the organisers will have to pay for the damage left behind. Here's our correspondent, Simon Harris.
The morning after the night before, and there was nothing glorious about the mud in Finsbury Park. Large parts of this North London open space were a soggy mess after it hosted the Tough Mudder Challenge. Many of the walkers, runners and cyclists who used the park were furious.
It's rained for 3 weeks. They must have known this was going to happen, that it was going to ruin it, but they still can't let it happen.
I think it's a disgrace. I think Haringey Council essentially sell the park out to the highest bidder.
I just think it's destroyed the park. What I think it's unfair that it just looks like vandalism, really.
Tough Mudder describes itself as the world's best obstacle course and mud run. It's hugely popular around the globe. The Finsbury Park event attracted 7,500 competitors. Junior took part to raise money for orphans in Africa and was surprised how tough and muddy it was.
Very muddy. It was. I was struggling to stand up. I could normally run 5K quite well, but the mud was really slipping, made it even more difficult for you to be able to do the 5K in the time that I normally would do it as well.
24 hours after the event, Tough Mudder was still making its mark. The operation to dismantle the obstacle course seemed to be creating even more mud. For those taking part, events like this are tremendous fun. Many of the participants raise thousands of pounds for good causes. But the question being asked here is, at what cost? Nature might heal itself, but it won't happen overnight, and parts of Finsbury Park are now so muddy as to be of little use.
I think it's devastating, if I'm totally honest. I don't blame Tough Mudder. You know, I'm sure that most of the contestants are good people running for charities. An urban public park is not the right place for it. It's taken over our whole park and the destruction is terrible.
Labour-run Haringey Council declined to talk to ITV News, but the deputy leader released a statement saying the impact of the event this year has caused several weeks' worth of damage to the park, and as a result, we have had to rethink our approach. To prevent the risk of this repeating, we have decided that this event will not be held in Finsbury Park going forward.
I think Haringey Council have got serious questions to answer. You know, they've obviously allowed a much bigger event this year. It's taken over the majority of the park, and the destruction is going to last for weeks, if not months.
Tonight, Haringey Council said the organisers of the Tough Mudder would pay for repairs to the park.
So, Simon, that begs the question, what have the organisers had to say?
Well, Charlene, as you can see behind me, they're still working to dismantle some of the obstacles, and I think only when they have gone will it be possible to fully assess the damage. But we have had a statement from the organisers, from Tough Mudder, saying it recognises the damage to the park and the impact on the local community. The big question now is how much will it cost to fix and who will pay for it? Haringey's statement certainly suggests that the council expects Tough Mudder to pick up the bill. But Tough Mudder's statement is less explicit. It talks about an ethos of togetherness, and that being an ethos of togetherness which will restore the park with the council. Whether that ethos of togetherness involves sharing the bill isn't clear. But I think it's pretty safe to say that after the decision to cancel future Tough Mudders, both Haringey and the organisers recognise just how much of a disaster this weekend was.
All right, Simon, thanks very much for that.
Good evening. HS2 has confirmed what was becoming painfully obvious for the families and businesses who have endured years of disruption. Work connecting the high-speed railway to Euston will not be starting next year as planned. The government had previously announced focus would be switched to building the route into Old Oak Common from the north instead. With an indefinite delay to the building of the £1.2 billion tunnel, residents and business owners have been left furious and wondering whether all the planning and building work carried out so far has been for nothing. With the latest, here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Europe's biggest construction project is in a hole and they've decided to stop digging. HS2 bosses have confirmed the planned tunnelling operation to connect Euston and Old Oak Common has been put on indefinite hold. It means the high-speed line from Birmingham will terminate in West London for the foreseeable future. For 6 years, Robert has had to live next door to a building site.
It simply means that we can't get on with our lives. We've had all this construction noise, all our local facilities have closed, people on the north part of Regent's Park Estate can't get to the Hampstead Road because it's all closed down by construction works, and we just don't know what our futures are.
Ministers ordered the pause in work because of spiralling costs, largely driven by inflation. Businesses in Drummond Street, famous for its curry houses, have been especially hard hit by the construction work. One end of the street has been closed to traffic. Now there's no end in sight to the disruption.
Makes me angry, very angry. I mean, anger is one thing and loss of trade is a big thing. Not just for me, for the other traders here. This is like bread and butter. Most of these businesses are owned by family. It's not corporate.
2 years ago, Euston was targeted by environmental activists. They occupied part of Euston Square, climbing trees and digging tunnels in protest at plans to cut down some trees to make way for a temporary taxi rank. With the project now on hold, the new taxi rank is no longer needed. So HS2 bosses are looking for something else to do with the site. One idea being considered, apparently, is a pop-up food market. HS2 said, following the decision to pause work on Euston and HS2's tunnels to the station, we are looking at what opportunities there may be to make temporary use of areas not required for the project over the next 2 years.
Doesn't it make you sick? I mean, we need a pop-up food market like, was it worth destroying our park and cutting down our trees for a pop-up food market? What is the matter with these people?
Work on some of the construction sites in and around Euston will come to a standstill. HS2 isn't saying how many workers will be laid off. With no timetable for restarting work on the link to Old Oak Common, it's a huge setback to the promised redevelopment of Euston. Simon Harris, ITV News, Euston Station.
The Transport Secretary has told a select committee there could be even more delays to HS2 services into London. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is here. Simon, talk us through this latest development then.
Well, Lucrezia, you'll recall that yesterday HS2 confirmed to us that there was effectively an indefinite delay in building the leg of HS2 from Old Oak Common in West London to Euston Station. That's because the cost of the new Euston has spiralled out of control and inflation is also affecting general construction costs. Well, today, the Transport Secretary Mark Harper appeared before MPs and confirmed that the sites at Euston would now be mothballed, although he said they would restart, but there's no fixed timetable for that yet.
The commitment to take HS2 to Euston remains in place, and the timing of that will mean that that is delivered when we have the line open to Manchester. And my understanding from having interrogated officials is that's when the volume of passengers will require the service to go all the way to Euston. So that remains the government's commitment.
I can tell you that TfL and the Mayor disagree with that analysis, that Euston won't be needed until the Manchester leg opens. But more importantly, the Manchester leg is not due to open until 2035 at the earliest, possibly 2041. So 18 years away, possibly. If there are further delays, even longer.
Goodness me, that is a long time. Simon, thank you.
Next tonight, it's a multi-billion-pound industry that accounts for more than 10% of our GDP, but London's tourism sector is struggling. Hit hard by COVID lockdowns and the cost of living crisis, the capital's attractions desperately need foreign visitors back, but there's another hurdle. Since Brexit, those coming from the European Union can no longer travel here without a passport, a rule that the Mayor says should be relaxed, as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
London's tourist trade is about to get a welcome shot in the arm. The King's coronation in just over a fortnight will showcase London around the globe. The industry has had a tough 3 years.
It's a complex world at the moment with COVID, with the change to our relationship with the EU and with the cost of living crisis. But it's hard to know which bits of that are having the bigger impact.
London's many attractions have an enduring appeal.
I love to see the palace.
We love listening to the British accent.
I think I loved Westminster Abbey.
First time in London for these guys, right?
But for tourists from Europe, like these Greek language students, there's now an extra cost.
Well, everyone had to get a passport, and that, of course, made it a lot more expensive.
Before Brexit, hundreds of millions of EU citizens could use their national ID cards to travel to the UK, but not anymore.
The UK is effectively saying, right, you can come to Britain, but you are going to have to go to the post office, pay €100 and get a passport. And a lot of them are saying, no thanks very much, we'll go to Paris or Barcelona or Berlin or Rome.
In 2019, pre-COVID and pre-Brexit, tourist spending in London amounted to £18 billion a year. The industry is calling on ministers to rethink the entry rules.
This is something that the government should absolutely consider doing a U-turn on. School groups, children's groups and English language learning is incredibly important to the UK tourism market, and making that as easy as possible for children and young people to come here is incredibly important, not just for that sector but for tourism more generally.
Anyone else for the hop on, hop off today?
Rami has spent more than 20 years in the industry working on tourist buses. He's seen the highs and lows.
The boom years, I think, were definitely the golden ones were between 2012 with the Olympics and 2014 and 15. And then it was a slight decline from 16, 17, 18, then COVID completely decimated it.
Overseas visitors are coming back, but China's strict COVID travel ban has only recently been relaxed. London's tourist industry isn't yet where it was.
Simon, you're over at the Late Debate studio for us tonight, aren't you? Can you tell us what's coming up on the show?
Well, on the Late Debate, Charlene, we'll be asking whether the passport rule should now be relaxed to encourage more school parties from the EU to come to London. The government says national ID cards can easily be abused by criminal gangs and illegal migrants. To discuss it, I'm joined in the studio by the Westminster MP Nikki Aiken, Croydon MP Sarah Jones and Twickenham's Munira Wilson. We'll also talk about the Met and what it needs to do to earn the trust of Londoners. And are those controversial attack ads just part of the normal cut and thrust of politics? That's the Late Debate here on ITV1 after news at 10.
Great. See you later, Simon. Thanks.